we as a company can't be afraid to ask hard questions. Like that's literally our job. And so I will answer any question you guys have the guts to ask.
Welcome to Not Another CEO podcast. I'm your host, David Politis. Every week, we talk to inspiring leaders and get the true stories, the ups and downs, the lessons learned, and come away with actionable advice for our own journeys. Today's guest is a visionary leader in the digital media industry, particularly in B2B media and publishing. He is the co-founder and former CEO of Industry Dive, a digital media company that publishes business news and original analysis for 16 million executives in 30 markets. Under his leadership, Industry Dive consistently ranked as one of the fastest growing private media companies in the US. They won all kinds of Best Places to Work awards, and they built an amazing business that was bootstrapped for a long time. In 2022, Industry Dive was acquired by Informa for over $500 million. Please welcome co-founder and former CEO of Industry Dive, Sean Griffey.
Thanks for having me here, Dave. Been excited about this.
I'm very excited. So let's go right out of the gates. First question: what is the one thing that you did, big or small, at Industry Dive that had the biggest impact, and you'll do again if you're CEO of another company in the future?
Well, I'm going to cheat and quickly go with two things, right? One of the big things, which we had a hyper focus on keeping things simple. And, even before I knew it, one of the things that we always tried to do was, how do we make this product simpler? How do we make our messaging simpler? How do we make the processes that drive the business simpler? And I really think that if you spend, more of your time thinking about that, the operation and the execution becomes much easier. And that's like really what the biggest risk for most of these companies is in the execution, right? And simplicity clarifies and clears the mission for everyone so they know what they're doing. So that was one. The smaller one, I didn't realize the impact it would have is whenever someone joined, every single person that joined the company, the first thing we did was we gave them a $50 gift certificate to a local coffee shop and a list of 12 questions about the company and people in the company. And we said, you have to take people out to coffee that aren't within your department. It can't be anyone on your team. It can't be anyone in your department, but you have to take people out to coffee and find out the answers to these questions. We call it the coffee challenge. And then after a couple weeks they've been in the company, 2 weeks have been in the company, in the company meeting, we'd ask them to, introduce themselves, say who they took to coffee, and then answer one of the questions. And what the real value of that was, it got the teams to look outside of their own department, build relationships across the company, right? And we were just trying to have fun and have people feel part of the team, but it really gave someone in editorial a contact in the sales team or in the ops team or the finance team and vice versa. And that had real value to us at different times.
I love the coffee challenge. I like that. Did you do that like from the beginning or only as you got bigger?
It was probably about 20 people when we started it. So it was
so
early.
That's early.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, we're a bootstrap business. When we got to 20 people, it felt like we were getting big, and so we're like, hey man, there's 20 people here. Like we've got the 28th person coming in, let's make them, meet people. So.
And were you in office culture? Was everyone in the office?
In the early days, we were, though, we have 100+ journalists, right? You can't, if you want people to cover these industries, you got to allow them to live anywhere, right? You can't expect experts on 30 markets to all be located in one city. So we always had a healthy remote culture. It's certainly, over the last couple of years, we spread out significantly. When we sold Industry Dive, we had offices in London and in Bangladesh and people all over the world.
Got it. And give me like just what are some of the examples of the questions? I like this a lot. I feel like this is like a really good tactical thing that people can take. Like, what kinds of things would you have in those questions?
Yeah, it was some of it was a mix about the business, right? Like who are the target readers of Utility Dive? But some of it was name 3 people who joined Industry Dive full time as former interns. And so it would be a mix of sort of people and sort of jokes, and one of the things that we did in the early days when there was 7 of us in one room is we fought over what the all-time greatest album was, right? And so it was like the question was like, what was the, greatest album of all time, as determined, here. So there were all those kinds of things. It was a mix of make people
It's like
laugh.
company folklore and like
Exactly.
yeah, wow. I really, the cross-departmental thing is something that it took me a while to appreciate, even in a small company, how siloed if you're an engineer or you're a salesperson, even in a small company, you don't really know I mean, why would you work with each other, generally speaking? And so I like that, and it's very powerful when you do that because people find out what the other teams are I had this experience at one point where it was like we had an engineer doing support, which a lot of people do at their companies to have like that empathy. And he sat with the support team. And I remember afterwards, he said, "Oh my God, like what they do is amazing. Like they are like our heroes." And they never really appreciate that until they go through it. So anyway, that's like the coffee challenge I love.
It's so hard to break the silos and keep them broken, but when you do, people don't view it as, hey, that's this team's problem. They view it, this is our problem, right?
Right.
When you say like, oh, finance can't get inventory data, bookings data from whatever, like, well, that's finance problems. But so when an op says, actually, that's all of our problems, and I can solve it because I'm friends with them and I'm connected with them, and I
Right.
see more
Right.
how this impacts us.
On the simplicity front, I want to tactically, how do you, I am, I think things can get out of control pretty quick, in terms of working on projects that don't make sense to the business, hiring roles that don't having meetings that don't make sense. Like, how tactically do you keep it simple?
Yeah, I mean, I also have to give credit to you. One of my co-founders, like he was the one that really sort of opened my eyes about driving this and did the rest. I mean, I think, yeah, for different parts of the business, for our sales team, we would stop and say like, hey, the pitch decks have gotten too big and too unwieldy. Like, how do we take our message down to, fewer bullet points, but clearer messaging? How do we think of it that way?
Mm,
We would stop and say with the processes, like, it'd be very deliberate of let's spend a day thinking about other ways to do this, easier ways to do this. And particularly in the early days, we'd stop and say, okay, we're spending a lot of time creating these contracts or spending a lot of time, sending this. How do we make this easier? And
mm,
there's no magic bullet or one way to do it. It's just being deliberate about it, right?
mm.
If you had to say, if I had to explain this to someone, how would I explain it to them? Now, how would I make it easier for someone new to understand it? And as soon as you say, how would I make it easier? You figure out ways to make it easier.
So you're just basically constantly asking that question. Like anything that comes up, you're saying, is this the easiest way to do it? Is this the easiest way to explain it? And you just constantly bring that up.
Absolutely.
Did you have to do that as the co-founders? Did that ever, like, did it become a thing that everyone was just like sit in meetings and, the salesperson or the marketing would just say, can we make it easier? How do we make, did it become like in the everywhere in the
I
business?
think it did, and we didn't even have to say it, and in reflection, I think part of what did this is we operated in 30 markets, right? We were creating news and information for people in the electric utility space, in the waste and recycling space, in biopharma, healthcare, food and beverage. And so part of us trying to keep it simple was, if we're doing this in one industry, we've got to do it 29 more times. Right. And so that is
Mm,
sort of a little bit of what drove it, is hey, the product set has to be we want it to be the same across 30 times. We want the tech stack to be the same 30 times. We
Mm.
want to we want to drive everything down into simple and standard arrests. That's how we become efficient. And so I think that focus was something that everyone did over time. I think the keep it simple was something in the beginning we talked about a lot more, and then that just became the norm.
Hmm. You mentioned your co-founder there. How many co-founders did you have?
There were three of us total. So and I stopped and thought about this the other day. I mean, we worked together for 20 plus years, and I got incredibly fortunate to work with two people who you know you hear the horror stories of co-founders, right? And arguments and the rest. I never had to worry about their intentions or what they're doing. I mean, there were times that we did agree on something, but it was very few, and we were always aligned on the end goal, which was pretty fortunate.
How did you meet each other in the first place?
We were at another small business that, we joined, and I joined that other small business, and there were, I think I was about the 10th person there. And the two of them were already there. So they were veterans, and I came in as person number 10. And that was something that we grew and sold to a private equity platform. And then ran, the original founder left, and we ran the business for the private equity firm. And over time, we said, hey, there's opportunities to do a similar business, but a little bit differently. And, um, you know, and this would be more fun to do for ourselves. And so we branched off in 2012, the three of us, and launched Industry Dive.
And how did you decide when I think the co-founder dynamic is, if you don't get that right, I mean, it'll derail the company. And even if you're the best idea and everything, it starts messing up cap tables and creates obviously all kinds of different drama. How did you get aligned on roles? How'd you get aligned on equity split? Like, how was that, like, right away? Everyone knew, like, Sean's gonna be the CEO. This person, like, was that right away, or did you have to work through that?
So that was a right away thing for us, and it's partly that we've been working together for so long. We also have incredibly complementary skills, right? So I was, running the business CEO. Um, one of my co-founders is chief revenue officer and came from the sales and revenue side of the business, and is just fantastic at that. And the other was the CTO, and developer, and very clearly had those skill sets. So we could divide the business up and say, here's where we are. We jointly worked on product and strategy in the early days, and what are we doing, and where do we need to get better. But there was definitely areas of expertise where we came in and said, like, no, you've got to do this part, and I've got to do this part. You take the lead on this, and having that, just provides so much leverage when you say, here's someone I really trust who shares a vision for me, and I know they have this big part of the business. I'm here to help, but they're also experts at this. That was just
Mm.
like great.
And so you basically knew each other, if on my math, it's like 7 years or 6, 7, 8 years or something before you started the business.
Yeah, 7+ years. So
So it's like that's a lot of dating
it's a
before
lot of
getting
dating. I
married.
mean, we were engaged, dating and then engaged for a long time.
And did everyone stay with the business for the whole time until you were sold in 22?
We did.
Wow.
Yeah, it was 13 years together, and the whole runs through a lot of, as you know, as a builder, you get some ups and downs there, but it's would start another business with the two of them today.
So you scaled the business quite a bit. We're going to talk about the bootstrapping, which I have a lot of questions about, but you scaled the business quite a bit. And I would say, I don't want to say, like, but one piece of advice that founders get a lot is the team that kind of gets you here won't get you there, you hear the story many times. I have personally been through the story of having to replace the CRO, the CTO, these people as the company scales. Um, did you have to do that outside your founder group, or did you put that team together and just that the whole team happened to be able to scale all the way, that's many different stages of a company.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had to recognize where the business was outgrowing our skill sets, and we brought people in to complement us, right? So the three of us stayed in the roles. In the early days, when we're bootstrapping, I'm the MBA guy. I was the accountant. I did the books, and at some point, it's like, no, I'm a fake CFO. I'm not a CFO, right? And so we brought in a CFO to sort of run that. Co-founder who's the CTO, he is an incredible technologist and visionary, and I think he's one of the best to really bridge the business needs from the technology, side. Like he really understood what the business was trying to do and how technology needed to play a role in it, and knew our industry ups and downs. But we brought in VP of engineering to manage the tech teams, right? So he wasn't going to be when we have 3 full scrum teams running and the rest, like he didn't want to be, and it honestly wasn't the best use of his time to be the day-to-day manager of those folks. And so we brought in people like that. And so I think as the business got bigger, we made our job smaller by filling in people who were better at the parts of the business where we get it.
That makes sense. I want to talk about the bootstrapping because so far on this show, I think I've had, 3 or 4 people who've bootstrapped. And those are some of the most popular episodes. I think it's also becoming something that more and more people are looking at doing, I think as like from a trend perspective right now. So I just want to, from the beginning, when you were, the 3 of you were starting the company, did you say to each other, we are going to bootstrap this business?
Well, it was a mixture of both. I mean, we did. I'll say we raised 400,000 in angel money, and it was a little more than friends and family. It was local professional angels, but not VC firms or sort of the rest. I mean, these were individuals. We also I saved for 1.5 years because I knew I wasn't going to pay myself for a year, right? And I took the last year. We gave our prior company a year's notice that we were going to leave and do this. It was about like 9 months. And we offered them a chance to invest, but we also knew that they needed time to build a team around us.
Right.
And so we just said, if we stay to the end and we earn our bonus, I'm going to live off that bonus for a year, right? And so we didn't pay ourselves for the first probably 18 months of this. Like we worked really hard. We saved all of the money that we could to get there, raised 400,000, but used that into hiring some early folks. It kind of went from there.
And so did you go out to fundraise, post that 400,000 investment? Or or was that like, we're taking 400,000, we're not taking salaries for 18 months and we're just going to bootstrap this? Like, mentality wise, like what was the, what was the mentality?
We started having conversations, with, VC firms and we were looking to raise, I will say the early indications were very much, like we were starting a B2B media company targeting the electric utility industry at a time when BuzzFeed was getting hundreds of millions of dollars to do social, right? And so the media investors sort of looked at us and said, you're doing digital lead generation in the waste and recycling and utility industries. And like, so we knew, like, we recognized early on it was going to be a hard road. We also got some sort of not firm preliminary term sheets from folks. And we just thought, wow, this doesn't recognize where the business is. And if we can hold on for another 12 months, this business will look a lot different and we can go raise then on entirely different terms. And so we took out a little bit of debt, and support from our angels. When we got to the point 12 months later, the business had grown enough that we were throwing off cash, and we decided we don't like, why do we need to why do we need to bring in a VC for raise a bunch of money when the business is cash flow positive and we can invest, like we're investing money back into the business at that point. And so we kind of, you know, a little bit luckily and a little bit intentionally skipped the whole VC standpoint. It got to the point where, we had healthy EBITDA margins. The business was growing, 20-30% annually. And we got it to I always say in our industry, you want to be sort of north of 20 million top line and 5 million EBITDA. And then the private equity guys really start to get excited about you. Right. And so we got to that point and skipped right to private equity.
And what would you have done differently if you were able to raise, if you had gotten a good term sheet, you were able to raise, what do you think you would have done differently in the business? Anything?
Maybe. I mean, I think there's like a part of this is you have to recognize where you are and the rest. I was always one of these guys pushing for our business to be profitable. Like I just I just sort of said like this is to be self-sustaining. Like we need to be profitable. We need to like be able to do the rest. And so I don't know if I might have had a hard time with the VC mentality of like, no, go big. Let's lose a bunch of money for the next 4 years and sort of scale this. And I honestly think, in some industries, software, that probably makes a lot of sense. In the media industry, I don't know if VC is actually the right financial vehicle for it because in the early days, the most important thing for a media company is to build an audience and to build a real audience, not sort of traffic from a social network or flyby SEO. It's to build people who have an affinity with your brand and you. And that's a little bit like pregnancy, and you can't hurry it, right? And so I think there's this misalignment where VC comes into media industries and tries to accelerate something that needs organic time for itself. And so that, more than anything, I think was what we got really lucky with is we didn't hit these, artificial constraints where we're trying to grow an audience, and what you end up growing is traffic, but not like loyalists.
That is a really interesting point. It makes sense. Like from a media perspective, if you were an investor, like you need volume of followers or audience or whatever it is, and you can spend to get it, to your point, but that's not going to be real. Like that's not, and I get that.
It's a sugar high. It's a total sugar high that doesn't last, and you need to really kind of have the balanced diet.
And that just doesn't work. I mean, that is not in the venture model, really. That doesn't make sense, for their model. What is your opinion, new person, new company? I'm sure people reach out to you, founders, CEOs, new company getting off the ground. How would you talk through with them? Kind of the should they go raise $1 million today at a 10 million post and get right on the hamster wheel? Should they try to build profitably for as long as possible? Should they what is do you have a philosophy on that that you would say to the next generation?
Well, but I think it depends a little bit on the business and the opportunity, right? Like I'm not going to be the one that says, oh, you can't do this. I mean, clearly if you're doing something, you're going to go build something that requires manufacturing and the rest, right? You're going to need capital. If you've got equipment and the rest, like you're going to have to raise money because you just can't bootstrap, solar panels, right? Even if it's like, whatever it is. And so I think you got to be realistic of the business. I think the thing that I caution people all the time, there is a whole world of people who've raised a lot of money and built businesses that should be a double, but because of their cap table, they're underwater the whole time, and it's the rest. It's kind of a mess. And so I think I think one of the healthier things in sort of this environment is the last couple of years. I mean, clearly, you know, 5, 10 years ago, everyone was just celebrating the raise, and it was like the I raised money, congratulations, and the rest. And I think we've not completely gone away from that, but we're in a much healthier place where people realize the raise is just a step in the process. It's not the outcome. And saying I'm working with a tier one VC firm doesn't mean you're successful. It's just a step. And so I think we're much healthier there than we were, as maybe a decade ago. But I will tell people, I mean, particularly in the media industry, I would bootstrap this as long as you can. And then I'd bootstrap it for a little bit longer. And then I would try, I would go see if I needed money from there. And the druther is that clearly it was something that worked for us. But if I had to do it over again, I'd do everything I could to skip the VC, go bootstrap to private equity, use private equity as the growth accelerator, and go from there.
So from a private equity perspective, what year was that? So you started in 2012. What year did you engage with the private equity firm?
2019.
Got it. So 7 years in. And when you did that transaction, what was your experience with the private? It sounds to me, I mean, obviously it was successful financially, but, there are mixed reviews on what it's like, going from a founder, especially of a bootstrap company, like a founder of a bootstrap company to working for private equity, essentially. What was your experience there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was, it was a great experience. And I think, there's a couple things. One, I think I ended up just working with, one of the best private equity firms out there, Falfurrius Capital, out of Charlotte, sort of mid-sized companies, just incredibly pragmatic and fair people. And they have a mentality, where they might be the smartest people in the room, but they certainly never act like it. Right. And I think there's some of the bad private equities. I think there's a lot of people, and I went to business school and have an MBA. And so I say this, but there's a lot of people who go to business school, get an MBA, go into private equity and never run a business, and then think that they know how to run the business better than the teams running the business. Right. And so the private equity company we ended up with never acted that way, even though they all had real operating experience as well, and were incredibly sharp guys. So I think that foundation of the right partners really served us well. It also came at a point where my co-founders and I really knew that the business had the potential to accelerate. Like we went from hey, this could be a nice business that's throwing off cash, and we can continue to grow it, to no, this business really needs more than what we can do right now to grow. And I was a little naive, actually. I was, before we, hooked up with private equity, I was starting to talk to lenders about how much debt we could raise on our own. And I did all this stuff to get ready for it, in terms of getting audits and quantity of earnings and the rest, which only helped us get a deal done. But, it turns out that the lenders won't lend a business money. They'll lend a private equity company more money with the exact same asset for some reason than they will the business itself. But I went to go say, like, I'm going to raise money to, we're going to go raise money to be more aggressive. And then really disappointed at what someone would lend us. And so we're like, well, this isn't going to work. And, private equity started showing up at Sirius at that point.
And so when you say, they kind of helped you, in this next stage of the journey, is it like, did they know how to scale hiring better than you? Did they know how to scale the audience building? What were the things that they, were they just, was it more about the financial construction, and of the company? Like, Where do you think they added the most value?
Well, I mean, I think it was a couple different things, right? So there was an operating partner that they brought in to sort of be on our board and help create a thesis of where companies could go in the industry. And we actually, I always said that we were contrarians in the market, right? And like, we were trying to do electric utility when BuzzFeed was going social, right? Like we were contrarians in media until we met the operating partners in Falfurious who had a same vision of us and saw it in a slightly different way, but the Venn diagram was like 80% overlap. And so it was really nice to get a thought partner for someone who had built businesses and sold businesses, not doing exactly what we did, but doing tangential parts of it and helping us say, like, here's how these tangential pieces can complement and help the business. And so that was really great. They certainly helped us when we did acquisitions. It was nice to have a team of private equity analysts to run down due diligence and to deal with the banks and do some of those things that we just weren't built to do. Like we just weren't staffed to do some of that. And then there was, very minor things that I don't know if I would have thought of, but that I learned, when the pandemic came, and I mean, it's like what today is 5 years, 5-year anniversary for the pandemic hit, right? I remember we were in good shape. We had a ton of cash on the balance sheet. Like we thought we were going to be good, but the private equity partner, the senior partner, called me and just said, "Hey, you need to pull your entire line of credit today." I'm like, "Nah, we got a ton of cash. What are you doing?" It's like, no, we don't know if the line of credit's going to be there in a week. The bank can cancel this line of credit. Like, go get the money. The worst thing we're going to do is pay some interest and then put the money back in. The worst thing is when you need the money, the line of credit's gone. And so it was like little practical stuff like that I don't, I was, just hadn't seen some of that stuff. And so they could step in where I had blind spots and just say, like, really think you should do this. And that was incredibly valuable.
One of the things that I think I see people that I've talked to, have sold to private equity, my own experience, there's a different kind of alignment, I think, financially. From venture, at least in my experience, again, in all the conversations I had, like people say, the private equity firm says, "Hey, we're going to acquire you for this amount of money. And for us to be successful as a firm, we need to sell it for Y amount of money in Z number of years." And it's like, which venture, you don't have that conversation with venture investors. They basically give you the money and say, get to as big as possible and return as much money as possible. You don't even know what success the bar is, like you don't, whereas did you have that same experience?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the alignment was, in part of they came in and they bought a majority of the company. And so we had a really nice outcome, right? Like it was the business was a win at that point. So it then got to the point where we felt like we could be more aggressive, right? Like I hadn't worked 18 months for no salary, for nothing. Like I had taken money out of the business and it was safe. But they also, let you roll over a significant portion of equity, right? It wasn't, they didn't come in and buy 95% of it and you get 1% left, right? You still owned a significant portion of equity there. And you knew that, hey, they're in a hurry. They have 3 to 5 years that they want to hold this thing, or 3 to 7, whatever the kind of terms are. And you know that, hey, they're going to want to be aggressive in the first couple of years, and then they're going to want to, they're going to want the business to be ready for an exit and outcome, a couple of years later. And so you get really aligned on, at the beginning, if you do this right, of what are the next 2 or 3 years going to look like that get us here before you do the deal, right? You stop and say, like, they come in and say, like, we want, we need, we want to do acquisitions. And you come and say, like, but actually I can get us most of the way there organically. And then we talk about like, okay, what does that mean, right? And what's the balance of how much of this is an acquisition strategy and integration? How much of this is organic growth? What are the things that we want to add so that the next buyer is going to look at this and say, this is an incredible business. It still has more room to grow, right? And you can come to that alignment very early, and then it's just execute against it, and the business is mature enough that you're not sort of making it up and pivoting on a day, like on a yearly basis or the rest, right? Like everyone knows, like this is a mature enough business. We kind of know where we can go from.
Hmm. So that deal's 2019, and then 22, you end up selling the company to a public company, Informa. And how was that process? Like, was that a process that was led by the PE firm? Was that something that you led? Did you kind of have, how long was that in the works? Can you talk a little bit about that?
You know, the I think what we saw the business, and this was all public information kind of. So we were doing just under 30 million when we got with the private equity, doing 100 million, say, when we sold 3 years later. And we had done some acquisitions, but probably added 15, 20 million of revenue to the acquisitions, and the rest was sort of organic.
Wow. Wow.
And so we knew it was a combination of things where the business had really performed over the 3 years. The macro environment, where things were lining up for our business, everything that we've been contrarian about, suddenly the pendulum swung back, and this is what people wanted, right? And so I think we sort of knew that, hey, the pendulum can swing again away from everything we're doing, and so the market timing was like really sort of this is a great, and as much as you don't want to try to time windows, sometimes you can look up and say, this is a really good time for us. And I think we were in agreement of there. I think the great thing about the private equity, the one thing that, they were majority owners, the one thing that they were very honest about when we were doing acquisitions, they'd say, we're not going to do an acquisition unless you, Sean, and your co-founders are bought in, because it's not going to work unless you're bought in. And then the next phase of it, when it was time to sell, was like, well, I don't know, we might want to go, but if you think it's time to sell, we're going to go, like, we're going to go on there. And I mean, it was a discussion, but it was a piece of, is this the right time or not the right time? And they really gave us, more input than maybe, the cap table said we should have.
Hmm. What was, throughout the entire journey, what was the biggest challenge you ever faced at the company, and how did you overcome that?
Listen, like I think there are business challenges you have at times, right? There's customer challenges you have at times. There's, the product things and the rest. But really, you look back at the things, more often than not, the most important thing to do is to get the teams aligned and working, well, and to make sure that the culture and the people are, as strong as they can be. And I don't, I'm really proud of what we built as a company, the culture and the teams, but I don't think it's always, an A. I think there are times for every business, just naturally things slip, and you have to like reinforce with the teams and the folks what's important in the rest. And when I look at the biggest challenges, it's how do we help the team navigate, the world around us in the pandemic, and the how do we navigate and think about different issues that are going on in terms of, in office or remote, or how do we think about when, inevitably key people leave and there's folks are demoralized, or when the company, more often when the company grows so fast that people, like we weren't hiring fast enough to support the teams and they start getting burnt out. and they don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so, those were I think as the CEO, those are the hardest things, like making sure the team feels supported and they are aligned, and they understand where we're going, and they understand our intentions and who we are, who we want to be, and what we aspire to be. Not just as a business, but as a culture and a company. And so that is where I spend more of my time. I think the number one thing of how you navigate that, for me, I just tried to be incredibly transparent, with the teams as much as I could. And uh, that was honestly, I think for me, the hardest thing as the company got bigger, when it was hundreds of people across the globe. I don't think it wasn't as easy for those people to feel like they had a real relationship with me. They would see me on a Zoom every Monday for a monthly, like a weekly call, but I don't think they, when there was 40 of us and we were in one big bullpen, like I think they truly believed what I was trying, what we were trying to do, and who I am. And so that's that for me was the hardest thing. How do you convey that stuff when it's someone who's going to always see you on a screen once a week?
Hmm. Yeah, the people is the big, right? Especially if you have a team of hundreds of people like that. That is, I think it all comes down to people issues. I actually feel like COVID was such a crazy moment because it really, with all the challenges that we have around people and managing people, and has been that case forever for leaders, that was like all of a sudden you had to be responsible for people's health, well-being, right? It was like this whole different dynamic, while also running you had to run the company. You had to generate the revenue to be able to pay those people, but at the same time you had to worry. I feel like literally 2020 to 2023, 20, like 24, that has to be the hardest period, I believe, for CEOs than ever before in the world. I don't know how, like there's been recessions, there's been this, but like the amount of things that occurred, up, down, real like health risks, all the, I mean, I don't know. That's how I feel, that period has to be the hardest period for CEOs.
I certainly agree. And I think you see a lot of people now. In the last couple of years, I've seen a lot of people that were CEOs that are kind of peer networks and stuff, and everyone's taking a step back. And said
Yeah.
like I need a break from this because it was a hard run, and there's a you're absolutely right in that. That more than any period was like you felt personally responsible for the well-being of people in ways that you didn't have to worry about before, right? While at the same time, the business is what gives you the flexibility and the opportunity to be taking care of folks in ways that you couldn't, and just a challenging time for sure.
So you mentioned, one of the things you mentioned was the weekly all hands that you did. Was that every week? I mean, was that like every week from when you started the company, Monday all hands?
Monday, yep. We do a quick 30-minute sort of all hands talk about what's going on in the business, introduce new people. Even when we were, hundreds of people, we made every week, and we weren't doing the coffee challenge at one point, but we'd still make people introduce themselves and say one interesting fact about themselves, and the rest, in front of folks. And that was an alignment. We also did, about 3 times a year, but not at a regular basis. I do a state of state sort of deep dive in the company. And the best part of that was I'd only talk for about 20, 30 minutes of, hey, here's how we're doing financially. I always share the finances. Like, it was kind of important to me, like, not to be one of those companies that said, here's where we are. And, like it's a secret how profitable we are or not profitable. Like, we talk about it all the time, but also saying, here's the strategic priorities. Here's what we're worried about, the rest. But then for about an hour and a half or 2 hours after that, I would take any question that someone would ask. And that
Live,
live,
live.
yeah, live. And people would send some in advance, and I'd ask for them in advance, and but answer them. But I'd also take them live from anyone, and uh, that I think was, it was always one of the more, I think people felt together after that. And for me, we're a media company. There's, 100 plus journalists. And I always said to them is, if you're afraid to ask, like, we as a company can't be afraid to ask hard questions. Like that's literally our job. And so I will answer any question you guys have the guts to ask. And so some of them were like really challenging questions about the structure of the business. Some of them were someone's unhappy about something and would want to vent, and the question would be more about venting of where we are and the rest. But we would tackle all of them at every time, and I felt like we just felt so much more aligned for the short period after those. That we would do those types of things. I would leave them exhausted, right? Because you're on for 3 hours, 2.5 hours, like fielding questions. But it was one of the better times in the company.
I tell CEOs all the time, I've been really vocal about this, of the all hands, these 3 times, a year state of the company, the meeting, like the operating rhythm is probably the best tool you have as a leader to drive alignment, to get people excited, to answer. I love those. I mean, to answer those questions and let people have a venue to say those things. Like, and I think people who don't invest in that operating, which I was definitely one of those people early on, you're losing maybe your biggest channel to do those things.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it's not enough just to do them. I mean, I think the thing for us that really helped, and maybe is our cultural one, is we weren't giving corporate answers back, right? Like if I was giving jargon and half answers back and not answering the questions, I think it would have been really ineffective and maybe done the exact opposite, right? Like if I just said, and there were times where I said, like, actually can't answer that, but here's why I can't answer it, or here's when you can expect to know. But most of the time it was very much like, I'm going to give a plain English answer about why we're doing something. And then that goes a long way with people. But if you come back and you spit out sort of consulting speak, and not say anything in your answers, that says something even worse to them. And so
Um, when did you step down exactly?
my last day was right before the holiday breaks in this last year. So December 20th,
Got it.
2024.
And so since you've stepped down, I don't know how to ask this question, but having gone through it myself, I would like to ask it, is how long do you feel like it took to actually decompress? Are you yet decompressed? Like, is that, you stepped down and like the next week you felt refreshed? Like, were you not even stressed, or, kind of like, what was that like?
I'm not there yet, if I'm being honest. I still, I'm sleeping a little better. So that's like a good sign, there were times, over the years where you turn over, wake up at 3 a.m. and then your brain would immediately turn on, right? And it was like, well, I'm not going back to sleep now. That has changed. But I've been busy in the 2.5, 3 months since then. I mean, I think one of the great things, you spend 13 years at a business. When you announce on LinkedIn that you're stepping down, a lot of people like reach out. And so I've been actually incredibly busy for the last 2 months and having coffees and drinks and Zoom calls with folks. And I'm doing, like maybe 3 or 4 of them a day. So it hasn't like, I haven't woken up and said like, I guess I'm golfing today yet. But we'll see when we get there. But
Do you foresee starting another company in the future? You think that you're going to do more investing and advising, and what do you think will be next?
I honestly, not ruling anything out, because I've seen people who are very certain of their answer, and then they get 9 months in and they completely change their mind on what it is. And so I want to be realistic that I don't know yet. If you ask me today, I don't think I'm not gonna go back to the days where we built our own desks and, had to do those things. Like, I'm just not sure, uh, I'm just not sure I'm have the energy to go back to that stage, right? Like I need to sign up for 15-year run to get something from the ground up to wherever. Right now I've started working with a couple private equity companies that I really respect in the area and helping them look at deals and helping them with their portfolio companies that in some of the industries I have experience. And so I've joined some boards and I'm doing some of that, and that sort of allows me to keep my fingers in it. But I think there's a chance at some point. I don't see it right now, but I think I'm not going to rule out the chance that someday. No, I have a good idea and I want to do something big, and I'm going to go find the next opportunity, or I see an opportunity and think, there's a lot of meat on the bone, and I really would be excited to kind of go after it. I just don't know.
Hmm. Do you did you always know that you were gonna be a CEO, a founder? Like, was that your dream, growing up, or did that just happen kind of through your experience?
I grew up. I was the first person in my family who didn't work for the government in some form. And I'm talking not just like my parents, but grandparents and the rest, were in the military or Department of Energy or Patent and Trademark Office or CIA. Like
Wow.
they were all like my whole family was government employees. And so when I graduated college, I went to work for, but at the time was Anderson Consulting and Accenture. And that was sort of like do you really want to do this? That sounds incredibly risky, from like my family set. And I thought that was like I thought for me, I'm gonna do something incredible and I'm gonna be like a senior manager at IBM, like a VP at IBM. That was my goals, and it really wasn't until I went back and got an MBA. And I know, it's really popular online now to poo-poo the value of MBAs, but for me, one of the values of it um, was I was surrounded by people who were really thinking big about what they could do in their careers. And that honestly been opened my eyes for I
Mm.
may be selling myself short on what I can do or should do because I'm arrogant enough to think like I'm just as smart as everyone. I'm just as capable of everyone. But I had somehow limited what I was gonna do. And it wasn't until I was at an MBA school when all these people were thinking bigger, and I said to myself, "Why am I not thinking bigger if they are?" And that sort of changed my lens.
I re- I've had now a number of guests who have said to me this thing about being around other people, like having somebody who was thinking bigger or showing them, it's kind of interesting, and people who didn't have it in their family, it comes later usually in life, but they can remember like, oh, I saw this person do this, or I had exposure to this person, and when they showed me that, I started wondering, why can't I do that? And I think that's actually a really interesting, like, I didn't get an MBA. Um, my feeling, at least talking to the founders who have gotten MBAs, it's about the people more than it is like the coursework. I don't think schools can keep up with this pace of change of businesses, especially entrepreneurship. But the people, that exposure feels like that's what you're basically paying for and putting your time into. I don't know. That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's more of that than anything else, right? And it's at least for me, and it wasn't. People talk about like, well, it's the network you're going to lean on the rest of your life. Like, it's not even really that. It's not like I'm like, oh, I need to go raise venture capital. Who from my MBA school is going to lend me money? Because I mean, like, it's money. But I don't think they're like, let me see your business plan, right? Like they're just as likely to give it to anyone. But to me, it was the sort of what I just said was, wow, like that they're gonna push you and inspire you to do interesting, different things, and you're gonna see that it's okay, but you're also gonna be like, I don't want to be left behind, kind of stuff. I'm
Mm.
competitive enough, right? That I'm like, well, I need to do something cool too, and so all of that kind of plays into it.
Did you have like a mentor or some kind of a role model, like earlier in your career, and through your career or as CEO of Industry Dive, like did you have a person that kind of served?
I think at different times in my life, I've had different ones. I will say one of our angel investors um, was a bit of an investor, and he was just a great guy and he subsequently passed. But he was just one of these guys that had these views of he immediately loved what we're doing. He loved unsexy industries, and he loved doing things that other people wouldn't do, and he loved the scrappiness of companies that were had sort of the bootstrap mentality and weren't saying like, oh, I got a bunch of money, let's go see the nicest offices we can get, right? Like he did all of that, and he had all of these, like, his name was Mark Teitelbaum. We had all these Mark isms where he would give to you all the time, and I still hear some of them in my head, about this stuff. And so I think having him cheerlead us, I think, was incredibly important where we were.
Yeah. Um, Knowing everything you know today, having all the experiences that you've had, if you could go back to the very beginning of your career before you started Anderson and you give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
It would have nothing to do with business, right? I would tell myself, you can afford the time and money to travel more. You can afford to take a 2-week vacation. I kind of, I think I was in my late 30s before I took 2 weeks off. I took a 1-week honeymoon, in that, just incredibly driven. I didn't go on big trips because I thought like, like I didn't want to spend the money, on those things. And so I think like I would only tell myself that, uh, there's an incredible amount of time to be successful. You've got all the time, and like, you've got a lot of time to be successful. You can enjoy it along the way.
Hmm. Really good. That is, no one has said that yet, and that is really good advice. I took a 36-hour honeymoon. Like I know exactly what I think that entire, basically the first, 20 years of my career, I didn't do the travel. I didn't, I did it sparingly because it was always like, I'll do a 3-day trip here. I'll do a 2-day because how can I leave for a week or 2 weeks? I think it's, that's really good advice. I actually think that when you do those things now reflecting, like it, it, it actually makes you better because when you come back, you have a different perspective, let's say, because you've taken the step out, you've gone out of the weeds for even a week, you can come at it from a different angle. So I really like that.
It's amazing how I would push other people to do it, but would never do it myself.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly. Um, if people want to get in touch with you, connect with you, what is the best way? Is it LinkedIn?
These days,
email,
LinkedIn is
or?
the best way. So Sean Griffey, LinkedIn.
Great. Awesome. Sean, I really appreciate this. I enjoyed this conversation a lot. I'm happy that we've gotten to meet each other and get to know each other. So I really appreciate you doing this with me.
Well, thanks for having me. This is a tremendous amount of fun.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed. If you did, please share this out with your networks. And we will see you for the next episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. That's a wrap for this week's episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, please visit notanotherceopodcast.com. We'll see you next week.